This is the brief on the Philippine legal framework protecting child identity. Now, identity theft isn't just about stolen credit cards. Tragically, under laws like the Expanded Anti-Trafficking Act of 2022, it's actually used to traffic vulnerable kids, meaning the law first has to define exactly how these identities get stolen. First, we have child laundering and simulation of birth. Child laundering means selling a kid by pretending they're an orphan. Simulation of birth, on the other hand, is tampering with the civil registry so a child appears born to someone besides their true biological mom. It's kind of like forging a masterpiece's certificate of authenticity. You're totally erasing the child's true history. Since erasing identity is step one in trafficking, the law really brings down the hammer here. Second, let's look at the severe penalties. Simulating a birth gets you 8 to 10 years in prison. But if a syndicate of 3 or more does it, it elevates to child trafficking, carrying 20 to 40 years. So, why go after doctors and nurses so aggressively? Well, because they're the ultimate gatekeepers of your legal existence. Medical staff faking records face permanent disqualification, and there are even fines penalizing adoption discrimination. But while ruthless against traffickers, the law sees a gray area. What about families who faked records purely out of love to raise a child? Finally, the Simulated Birth Rectification Act offers a 10-year amnesty for parents who simulated a birth before the law passed. If they acted in the child's best interest, they can legally adopt and correct the records without criminal charges, even protecting adult adoptees. It's basically a legal reset button, choosing compassion over blind punishment. Ultimately, this legal framework ruthlessly targets exploitative traffickers while offering a compassionate path to legitimacy for loving families.
Welcome to this video on the anatomy of a stolen identity, where we will untangle the Philippine laws that criminalize the erasure, simulation, and laundering of civil status. Civil status is more than just a record. It is a golden thread of rights. According to Black's Law Dictionary, it encompasses a person's public station, rights, duties, capacities, and incapacities. Severing this thread fundamentally strips a human being of their legal existence, affecting filiation, inheritance, and public standing. The legal evolution of civil status crimes in the Philippines has 3 phases. The classic era targeted individual deceit for inheritance fraud. The commodification era focused on illegal child trading. The modern syndicated era tackles organized trafficking, adoption fraud, and child laundering to wipe origins and make a child appear as an orphan. Article 347 of the Revised Penal Code defines foundational offenses: simulation of births, which involves pretending pregnancy; substitution, which is swapping children; and concealment or abandonment, done with the explicit intent to cause the child to lose its civil status. The same physical act, such as abandoning a newborn, can lead to different crimes based on the offender's intent. The intent determines the law applied, whether it's abandonment to avoid rearing, abandonment to lose civil status, or attempted infanticide. Article 348 penalizes usurpation of civil status, which is stealing an existing thread. The act involves representing oneself to be another, to assume their rights. The intent is critical. The offender must specifically intend to enjoy the rights arising from the victim's status. This is a distinct crime, separate from estafa. The modern evolution introduces child laundering, defined under RA 11862, the Expanded Anti-Trafficking Act of 2022. Child laundering is the act of stealing and selling a child to adopting parents under false pretenses, often through falsifying the child's origins to make them appear as an orphan. This is explicitly connected to severe trafficking offenses. RA 7610 dismantles the machinery of exploitation by targeting the entire supply chain, including the transaction of selling a child, the recruitment of mothers, medical complicity through simulation of birth records, and the sourcing of vulnerable children from low-income families and daycares. The syndicate multiplier, or reclusion perpetua, applies under RA 11642 and RA 8043. Acts committed by a syndicate of 3 or more conspiring individuals automatically elevate the crime to child trafficking, carrying a severe penalty of 20 to 40 years imprisonment. Professionals and government officials who create a false thread face 3 forms of liability: criminal, professional, and administrative. Simulation of birth record involves tampering with the civil registry to permanently erase the child's true identity, resulting in imprisonment and professional disqualification. The off-ramp, recognizing that not all simulated births are malicious trafficking, RA 11222, the Simulated Birth Rectification Act, provides a legal safe harbor. It replaces the old system and offers a 10-year administrative amnesty window to legally fix the civil registry, extending even to adult adoptees. To qualify for rectification amnesty, the simulation must have been committed prior to RA 11222's effectivity, done for the best interest of the child, and the child must have been consistently treated as the child of the purported parents. Meeting these criteria requires filing a petition for adoption, resulting in the total extinguishment of all liability. RA 11642 protects the repaired status by criminalizing behaviors that threaten the adoptive environment. This includes penalizing consent violations, endangerment of the adopted child, and the Adoption Discrimination Act, which prohibits creating negative stigma against adopted children. The legal threat matrix synthesizes the laws based on intent and scale. Malicious acts, such as child laundering, carried out by a syndicate, are penalized most severely with reclusion perpetua. Well-intentioned individual acts, like pre-RA 11222 simulations, are eligible for rectification amnesty. Philippine law provides a complex, unified net to preserve the golden thread. From the Revised Penal Code to the Expanded Anti-Trafficking Act, the ultimate goal is singular: to ensure that no human being is erased, commodified, or stripped of their foundational right to a true identity and family.
So what makes you, legally, you? It seems like such a simple question, right? But the answer is actually locked up in official documents. Today we're going to dive deep into the fascinating and, sometimes pretty dark world of civil status. These are the laws that protect our very identity and the crimes that try to take it away. And trust me, this is about so much more than just a name. It's about your entire legal place in the world.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get a handle on what your legal identity even is. Then we'll uncover the original, foundational crimes that could just shatter it. From there, we'll see how modern law has fought back, and we're going to zoom way in on the most common offense, faking a birth. We'll even look at a pretty surprising way the law lets you make things right, before we wrap up with a wild crime of literally stealing someone else's life. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, first up, your legal identity. For pretty much all of us, it starts with one single piece of paper, a birth certificate. But what does that document actually represent in the eyes of the law?
I mean, think about it. Your name, who your parents are, your birthday, it all feels so solid, so real. But just imagine for a second that this official record, the very first page of your life story, was a total lie. What happens then?
Well, that question brings us right to the heart of the matter, a legal concept called civil status. And no, it's not just about whether you're single or married. It's so much deeper than that. Think of it like the legal blueprint for your entire existence. It establishes your family connections, what the law calls filiation, and from that one point, literally everything else flows. Your rights, your duties, your place in society. And that is why messing with it is such a massive deal.
So, how do you even attack something so fundamental? Well, the law has known about a few key ways for a very long time. We've got to go back to the source, to what you could call the original sins of identity fraud, all laid out in Article 347 of the Revised Penal Code.
This foundational law points to three main ways you can create a false identity, or just erase a real one. First, you've got simulation of birth. That's pretending you gave birth to a child that isn't yours. Second, substitution, literally swapping one baby for another. And finally, there's concealment or abandonment, which is done with a very specific goal: to completely sever a child's legal ties to their actual family.
And here's where the law gets really specific. It's a super important distinction. Not all abandonment is the same crime. See, if you abandon a child just to get out of your parental duties, that's one kind of offense. But if your motive is to make them lose their civil status, like, say, to cut them out of an inheritance so your other kids get it all, that is the specific crime against identity we're talking about here. It's the intent behind the act that changes absolutely everything.
But, those original laws, they were written for a totally different time. As the world got more complex, these acts of deception started being used as tools for much bigger, much more awful operations. The law really had no choice but to adapt.
And this timeline here shows you exactly how that evolution played out. It starts way back with the old Revised Penal Code, which was mostly just concerned with family lines and inheritance. But then, look at 1992. A huge shift. Republic Act 7610 started seeing these crimes as pieces of a much bigger puzzle: child trafficking. Then you fast forward to just the last few years, and you see these modern laws that not only jack up the penalties, but for the first time ever, actually create a legal way for people to fix these fake records.
So the big takeaway here is this. The whole focus of the law did a complete 180. It went from just punishing a single act of deception to recognizing that these crimes are often just one small cog in the horrifying machine of organized child trafficking.
All right, so with that in mind, let's zoom in on the most common of these identity crimes, the simulation of a birth. How does modern law actually deal with it today?
Under today's law, the crime is defined as tampering with the civil registry. But the really crucial part of that definition is the result. The act has to cause the loss of the true identity and status of such child. That right there is the core harm that the law is trying to stop and punish.
And let me tell you, the law casts a very, very wide net. It is not just the woman faking the birth certificate or the person who gives them the child. We're talking any doctor, midwife, hospital staff member, civil registrar, or even a government official who helps out or conspires in any way. They can all be held criminally liable. Nobody gets a free pass.
And the penalties? They are serious. Just faking that registration can land you in prison for 8 to 10 years. But look at this. For doctors or nurses who abuse their position to make it happen, the consequences are way, way harsher. Not only do they face the same prison time, but they can be permanently banned from ever practicing their profession again. The law sees it as a profound breach of trust, and the punishment absolutely reflects that.
Now, I want you to pay very close attention to this number, 3. Just the number 3. Why on earth is this number so incredibly important?
Because the moment 3 or more people conspire to do this, the law doesn't see it as a simple simulation anymore. Nope, it automatically becomes an organized syndicate. The crime gets elevated to child trafficking, and the penalty just skyrockets to a mind-boggling 20 to 40 years behind bars. This is how the law draws a very thick line between a desperate individual act and a full-blown criminal enterprise.
But the law isn't just a hammer. In what is a surprisingly compassionate move, it also offers a way out, a path to correction, a way to turn what was a legal lie into a recognized truth.
See, the law actually understands that human reality is messy and complicated. It recognizes that not every single simulation of birth is done out of malice. Sometimes people do it from a very misguided desire to give a child a good home, truly believing it's in the best interest of the child.
And so a special law created this path to amnesty. It allows a family to come forward and make things right, but under a few key conditions. The simulation had to have happened before this new law was passed. It had to be done for the child's welfare, and the family must have always consistently treated the child as their own. If you can prove all that, you can file a petition to fix the record and legally adopt the child. And get this, the process completely wipes the slate clean. All criminal and civil liability, gone. It's an incredibly powerful way to bring these families out of the legal shadows.
All right, for our last section, let's flip this whole thing on its head. What if you don't create a fake identity from scratch? What if instead you steal a real one? This is the crime of usurpation.
The famous legal scholar Reyes put it perfectly. Usurpation of civil status is basically pretending to be someone else, specifically so you can assume their rights as a parent, or a spouse, or a child. You are literally stepping into their shoes to live their legal life.
And civil status in this context is incredibly broad. It could be someone's family rights, sure, but it could also be their position in a public office, or even their professional license, like a doctor or a lawyer. Basically, any legal role that defines a person's place in society can be stolen.
But, and you've probably guessed this by now, it all comes back to intent. To be guilty of this crime, you can't just be pretending to be somebody else. You have to have the specific goal of enjoying the rights that come with that person's status. Without that specific intent, it might be a different crime, like fraud or using a fake name. But it is not the unique crime of stealing a person's legal life.
Which really just leaves us with this final thought to chew on. What is more real? The family written down on your birth certificate, or the one you've known your entire life? The law has to draw clear, hard lines, but as we've seen, reality, well, it's often a whole lot more complicated. Thanks for digging into this with me.
What if you found out your entire life, your name, your family, your whole story, was built on a lie? It's a devastating thought, right? Well, today we're digging into 2 crimes that make that nightmare a reality: faking a birth and swapping a child. Now, they might sound kind of the same, but trust me, legally, they are worlds apart. So let's get into it. But before we dive into the crimes themselves, let me ask you something. What's your civil status? It's that little box you check on a million different forms without even thinking about it? But have you ever stopped to wonder what it really means? It's more than just a box to tick. It's the official legal foundation of who you are. I mean, really think about it. Your civil status is huge. It determines your last name, who you can inherit property from, your family connections, everything. It's basically your origin story written down in the language of the law. And because it's so fundamental, any attempt to fake or rewrite that story is taken very seriously. And that brings us to the heart of our discussion today, Article 347 of the Revised Penal Code. This is the specific law that lays it all out. You can think of it as the legal arena where the crimes of faking a birth and swapping a child are defined, debated, and dealt with. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at why this is considered a crime against identity in the first place. Then, we'll open up our two main case files, faking a birth and swapping children. After that, we'll put them head-to-head to see the crucial differences. We'll also see how the law has changed over time, and we'll wrap up by thinking about this big connection between who we are and the laws that protect us. So, what's the big deal, really? Well, the law sees these acts as a profound betrayal. See, it's not just about creating a fake document. It's about completely erasing a child's real heritage. It's about illegitimately inserting a stranger into a family line, which throws everything into chaos, from inheritance rights to the very fabric of family trust. It's an attack on the very root of a person's identity. All right, let's open our first case file, Simulation of Birth. The name itself kind of gives it away, doesn't it? We're not talking about an actual birth here, but making it look like one happened when it didn't. So, at its core, simulation of birth is a crime of paperwork, a fraud. The whole point is to tamper with the official records, the civil registry, to create a fake birth certificate. You're essentially making it appear that a child was born to someone who isn't their real mother. This single act legally cuts a child off from their true origins, and it's often a pretty elaborate deception. It usually starts with someone faking a pregnancy. Then, when the delivery date arrives, they somehow obtain a child from someone else. And the final, most crucial step is altering the paperwork, registering that child as their own, officially, and falsely grafting them onto a brand new family tree. Now, you might be wondering, what if they had good intentions? What if they just wanted to give a child a loving home? Well, in the eyes of the law, that doesn't matter. The focus isn't on the child's well-being in this case. It's on the fraud committed against the family they're being introduced into. A good motive just can't justify the deception. Okay, let's set that file aside for a moment and open our second one, the substitution of one child for another. Now, this crime is less about paper and ink and much more about a physical and frankly devastating switch. Right, so where simulation was a crime on paper, substitution is a physical act. And here's the key. It always involves two children. The crime is the literal exchange. We're talking about heartbreaking scenarios like swapping a living baby for one who has passed away, or that classic hospital nightmare of two newborns getting mixed up. For the law to call it substitution, three things have to be true. 1, there have to be two different children from two different families. 2, somebody has to physically swap them. And 3, this is the clincher, it has to be done with the specific intent of making it impossible to trace their true parentage. The goal is to completely erase their origins. So, we've looked at both of our case files. Now it's time for the main event. Let's put them right next to each other. This is where the differences really start to pop. And here it is, boiled down to the basics. On one side, you have simulation of birth. That's about creating a fictional record for one real child. It's a crime of a created identity. On the other side, substitution. That's about swapping the identities of two real children. It's a crime of stolen identities. See the distinction? Let's break it down even more. Look at the key action. Simulation is all about faking paperwork. Substitution is a physical switch. Now look at the number of children. Simulation gives one child a false identity, but substitution tragically pulls two children into this mess. And finally, their primary goals are totally different. Simulation is about introducing a stranger into a family. Substitution is about making sure a child's true identity is lost forever. So we get what these crimes are, but what's the legal fallout? How does the law actually punish these acts? And has that changed over time? Well, the legal response to these identity crimes has its own fascinating story. The story starts with the original Revised Penal Code, which first defined these crimes. But, laws evolve. We've seen various adoption acts come and go. But a really big one is the Simulated Birth Rectification Act. This shows a real shift in legal thinking, moving from pure punishment to actually recognizing the complex human stories that can be behind these acts. Yeah, this act is a real game changer. It actually created a legal way for people to fix these falsified records from the past. It basically says that if the simulation was done for the child's own good, the law provides a way to make things right through a proper legal adoption. And under certain conditions, it can even get rid of the criminal charges. It's the law acknowledging that these situations are often complicated. But don't get it twisted. While there's a path to fix past mistakes, the law today is strict. If you commit simulation of birth now, you're looking at a heavy sentence, 8 to 10 years in prison, plus a hefty fine. The message couldn't be clearer. There's an off-ramp for old cases, but a very steep penalty for new ones. So we've walked through the legal definitions, the key elements, the penalties, the whole shebang. But let's zoom out for a second. Why does all of this matter so much? Well, it brings us right back to that first question I asked you about your civil status. Ultimately, these laws are doing two crucial things at once. Yes, they're protecting families from fraud and the chaos it causes, but on a much deeper level, they are protecting every single individual's right to their own truth, the fundamental right to know who you are and where you come from. Because when that truth is stolen, the law sees it as a violation of your very being.
And this leads us to a final, really tricky question. The law is pretty black and white. Good intentions don't make the crime go away. But what about the ethics of it? If a lie gives a child a life filled with love and opportunity that they never would have had otherwise, does the benefit outweigh the deception? Where do we draw the line between a legal crime and a moral choice? That's the question I'll leave you with. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.
Hey everyone, so today we're tackling the crime of child abandonment. Now, you probably think you know what that means, right? But legally, well, it's a whole lot more complicated and honestly, way more interesting than you might think.
So let me throw this at you. Imagine a baby left on a church doorstep. Now picture another one, sold for cash. And a third left all alone in a forest. I mean, these are all horrible acts, right? But legally speaking, are they the same crime? You might be surprised by the answer.
And the answer, believe it or not, is a hard no. They're not the same. It all comes down to one single powerful word, intent. The reason someone did it, that changes absolutely everything. So let's break down what that really means.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about the main crime that this whole idea is built around. This isn't just about leaving a child. It's about trying to wipe their entire identity off the map.
So check this out. The law, specifically Article 347 of the Revised Penal Code, talks about a very particular crime. It's all about abandoning a child with one specific goal in mind, to make them lose what's called their civil status. And what's that? It's basically their legal identity, their family, their name, their whole history. This crime is about intentionally cutting all those ties.
And you know, there's a fascinating bit of history here. This law actually came about because of a common practice back in Spain. People would leave newborns at places like churches or hospitals. Now, they weren't trying to hurt the baby, quite the opposite. They wanted the baby to be found and cared for. But the real goal was to make sure that child's family history was a complete mystery, totally erased forever.
So let's drill down on this idea of civil status. Think of it as everything that makes you, well, you on paper. It's who your parents are, what family you're part of, your legal rights, even things like inheritance. So when someone commits this crime, it's not just abandonment. The law sees it as a direct attack on a child's basic right to even know who they are. All right, now for the really interesting part. Let's compare some crimes side by side and see just how much that intent really matters. Okay, this chart really lays it all out. Look at the first row. If your goal is to make the child lose their identity, maybe because you're worried about an inheritance or something, that's the specific crime we've been talking about, Article 347. But now, look at the next one. What if you just don't want the responsibility? You're just trying to get out of your duty of care. That's a totally different crime, abandoning a minor. And it gets even more serious. If you leave a newborn in a forest, where the intent is clearly for them to die, now we're talking about attempted infanticide. And finally, if there's cash involved, you sell a child, well, that's child trafficking. See? Same act of leaving a child, 4 completely different crimes, all based on the why. So let's zero in on this one comparison because it's so important. Losing status versus escaping duty. One is about erasing who a person is. The other is about avoiding a job you signed up for. And here's another key difference. Anyone can commit the first crime, the one about erasing identity. But to be guilty of the second one, abandoning a minor, you have to be the one legally in charge of them, their parent or guardian.
Okay, so that's the classic stuff. But how have things changed? Let's jump into the modern legal world, where things like faking documents and human trafficking come into play. This brings us to something called simulation of birth, and it's exactly what it sounds like, faking a birth. You're basically tampering with official records to make it look like a child was born to someone who isn't their real mom. It's another way to mess with a child's civil status, and it's often a shortcut people try to take to get around the proper adoption process.
And you can really see how the law has had to play catch-up over the years. You start with the basics in the Revised Penal Code. Then you get to 1992, and the government steps in with a law that says, hey, buying and selling kids is trafficking, and it's a serious crime. Fast forward to just a couple years ago, 2022, and the laws get even smarter, with tougher penalties, and a real understanding of how faking a birth can be part of a much bigger, more organized crime.
And this is a really, really important point. Modern laws are now connecting the dots. So things like faking a birth certificate or paying someone to sign adoption papers, they aren't just seen as little paperwork crimes anymore. The law now recognizes that these can be the first steps, the building blocks for organized child trafficking. It's all connected.
And the penalties? They're no joke. We're talking about serious prison time. Under the new law, if you're caught faking a child's birth registration, you're looking at 8 to 10 years. That shows you just how seriously this is being taken now.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of legal details here. What's the big takeaway? What's the one thing you should remember from all this?
It really boils down to three main things. First, and we've said it a bunch, intent is everything. The why you did something is just as important as the what. Second, the law doesn't just protect a child's physical safety. It protects their identity, their right to know their own story. And third, the law is always changing, always adapting to fight these horrible crimes in new and better ways.
So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Think about it. All these careful definitions, all these distinctions between crimes, what does that say about us, about a society? How we define crimes against the most vulnerable people among us really says a lot about what we value. It's about protecting not just a life, but an identity. Thanks for diving into this with me today.
You know, when we think about crime, our minds usually jump to, what, a stolen wallet, maybe a car? But today, we're going to get into something way more personal. The theft of you. The theft of your very identity. Think about it. We all leave this legal trail behind us, right? It's on our birth certificates, our IDs, our diplomas. But what happens when someone doesn't just want your stuff? What if they want to step right into your shoes? Or even worse, completely wipe your footprints off the map? Well, the law actually has a name for that, and it's a pretty wild and honestly kind of scary concept when you really dig into it.
In the Philippines, they're called crimes against civil status. And no, we're not just talking about a simple fake ID here. This goes way deeper. It's like a direct assault on the official record of who you are in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of society. So that begs the question, what in the world is civil status anyway?
Okay, so this whole civil status thing is a lot bigger than it sounds. It's basically your entire legal profile. It's not just whether you're single or married. It's everything. Who your parents are, what you do for a living, and, crucially, all the legal rights and duties that come with that. We're talking about things like the right to inherit property, or even the right to practice your profession, like being a doctor.
All right, let's dive in with the most extreme example first, just to see how serious this can get. Let's talk about creating a totally fake identity from scratch. This is a crime called simulation of birth.
So what the law is saying here is that this is all about messing with the official civil registry. Put simply, it's faking a birth certificate. The whole point is to make it look like a child was born to someone who isn't their real biological mother. And the tragic result, it completely erases that child's true identity, their real story.
And the way this crime unfolds is pretty specific. The law breaks it down into three basic steps. First, there's the deception, right? The offender pretends to be pregnant. Then comes the actual act of taking someone else's child. And finally, the big one. The child's legal status gets fundamentally changed. They're basically and illegally grafted onto a new family tree.
And listen, this isn't some dusty old law we're talking about. Modern laws have a new, chilling term for this: child laundering. That language is so powerful, isn't it? It perfectly captures this idea of falsifying a child's origins, often to push through some kind of illegal adoption.
And it gets even more serious. When this is an organized thing, done by a group of 3 or more people, the law kicks it up to a whole other level. It becomes what we know as child trafficking, one of the worst crimes imaginable.
And the penalty? Yeah, it's huge. For this syndicated version of the crime, we're talking up to 40 years in prison. The message from the law is crystal clear. The organized theft of a child's identity will be punished severely. Okay, so that's creating a fake identity. But what about stealing an identity that already exists? Well, that's a different crime entirely. Let's talk about usurpation of civil status. So unlike the first crime where you're just making a person up, usurpation is all about hijacking a real person's identity. The law is very specific here. It's about pretending to be someone else so you can take over their family relationships, act like you're their son or their spouse, or even take on their parental rights. So what kind of things are we talking about usurping? Well, it's a pretty wide net. It could be something like pretending you're the long-lost heir to a fortune. Or maybe you're trying to assume the rights of someone's husband or wife. And remember how civil status includes your profession? That means pretending to be, say, a licensed doctor could absolutely fall into this category. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Because the exact same act, impersonating someone, can actually be 2 totally different crimes. See, it's not about what you did, it's about why you did it. Was your goal to steal someone's life, or was it just about stealing their money? Yep, you heard that right. The same act, 2 different crimes. And the key for the law is to figure out which one it is. And it all boils down to that one little word, intent. The why is everything. Okay, let's break this down. With usurpation, your intent is to get the rights that come with being that other person. You want to be the heir, the spouse, the professional. Your goal is to literally step into their legal shoes. But with estafa, it's different. The intent there is just money. The impersonation is just a trick, a means to an end to defraud someone. So the crucial point here is that the law looks past the what and straight to the why. That motive, that's the bright line that separates the crime of stealing a life from the crime of just stealing some cash. Okay, enough theory. Let's put this to the test. What do you say? I'm going to throw a couple of quick scenarios at you. Your job is to tell me, is it usurpation or is it estafa? Ready? All right, scenario number 1. A guy shows up and pretends to be the long-lost son of a famous CEO. He's not just asking for a handout, he's there to claim a massive inheritance. So think about it. He's claiming a family relationship, the status of a son, to get the rights that come with it. So, what's the call?
Yep, if you said usurpation, you nailed it. That is a textbook example. His main goal wasn't just the money itself, it was to assume the status of being an heir. The money was just a right that flowed from that status. It's all about the relationship.
Okay, ready for round 2? Scenario 2. A woman uses a fake ID with a totally different name on it to get a huge bank loan. And of course, she has zero intention of ever paying it back. So, is she trying to take over that person's family or profession, or is there something else going on here? You got it. That's almost certainly estafa. She's not trying to become someone's daughter or wife. The fake ID, the impersonation, it's just a tool she's using to commit financial fraud. The end goal is the money. See, the intent changes everything. All right, let's wrap this all up with the key takeaways. First, these crimes against identity are a fundamental attack on a person's legal place in the world. Second, simulation of birth creates a fake identity, while usurpation of civil status steals an existing one. And the big one, the one that answers our main question, motive is everything. It's what decides if impersonation is usurpation or estafa. Are you trying to steal a life or just a wallet? And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. These laws were written way before the internet, before AI, before deepfakes, and all the fake profiles we see every day. In this new digital world, the lines are getting, well, really blurry. And it really makes you wonder, right? At what point does a harmless online persona, or a deepfake, cross the line and become a crime that steals not just your data, but your actual real-life identity? Definitely something to think about.
Let's dive into a really fascinating and honestly a deeply human legal issue in the Philippines. We're talking about what happens when a child's birth certificate, when it doesn't tell the whole truth. It's about a crime that's often committed with the best of intentions and how the law itself has had to change and adapt to offer a way to make things right. It's a story about an evolving amnesty.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get into the crime at the very heart of this. Then, we'll take a look back at the first attempt at a legal fix from 1998.
After that, we'll jump to the brand new law, which takes a much more compassionate approach. We'll put them side by side to really see what's changed, and then we'll wrap it all up by talking about what this really means for the families involved.
All right, so to really get why these amnesty laws even exist, we've got to start with the problem they're trying to solve. And that problem is an act called Simulation of Birth.
So what on earth does that actually mean? It sounds super formal, I know, but at its core, it's all about creating false papers. Basically, it's when someone messes with the official records, with the civil registry, to make it look like they gave birth to a child who isn't biologically theirs. It creates a completely false legal identity for that child, right from day one.
And let's be clear, this is a serious crime. Originally, the law was really designed to prevent fraud, to stop someone from creating a fake family connection just to cheat legitimate heirs out of an inheritance. But as we're about to see, the real-life reasons why people do this are often way, way more complicated than just money.
For a long, long time, families in this situation were just stuck. They were trapped in this legal limbo. But back in 1998, the Domestic Adoption Act came along and created the very first window of opportunity for them to fix things. The only problem? It came with a very, very strict deadline.
The law gave people just 5 years. That's it. A 5-year amnesty period to come forward, correct their child's records, and not have to worry about facing criminal charges.
But, it wasn't a free-for-all. There were some pretty strict conditions. You had to prove that what you did was truly for the child's best interest. You also had to show that you consistently treated the child as your own. And here's the kicker. You had to file the application to fix the birth registration within that super tight 5-year window.
Well, as you can imagine, that 5-year window slammed shut a long time ago, and that left a lot of families still in that legal gray area. So that led to a new law, Republic Act 1122-22, and this one shows a huge shift in thinking, building on what that first law tried to do.
What's the biggest change? The new law doubles the amnesty period. We're talking a 10-year moratorium for people to come forward, and that alone signals a much more compassionate and, frankly, a more practical approach to the whole problem.
Now, those first two conditions are going to look familiar. It has to be in the child's best interest, and the child must have been treated as their own. But check out step 3. This is a huge evolution. Instead of just correcting the paperwork, the new law requires a full petition for adoption. This streamlines the whole process to give the child a secure, permanent, and totally legal status all in one go.
Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of it. Let's put these two amnesties side by side so we can really see exactly how the legal landscape has changed. I mean, just at a glance, the difference is pretty stark, right? We went from a 5-year window that's long gone to a new, active 10-year opportunity. But trust me, the changes go so much deeper than just the timeline.
This table really breaks it all down for us. We've talked about the moratorium period doubling from 5 to 10 years. But look at the required filing. The old law was just about fixing a document. The new law combines that with a full petition for adoption, which is a much more solid outcome. And this is huge. Look at the scope. The new law, RA 1122, specifically says the benefits extend to adult adoptees. It recognizes this is a lifelong issue. And finally, the legal status, RA 8552, it's been repealed. RA 1122 is the law of the land right now.
So, what's the real-world impact of all this? I mean, why is the shift from a 5-year quick fix to a 10-year, more comprehensive path so important? Well, because it's about correcting so much more than just a piece of paper. It's about securing a person's entire future.
This phrase is really the guiding star here. It was a condition in both laws, sure, but the new legislation puts it front and center. It shows the legal system finally acknowledging that, yeah, the initial act was a crime, but the #1 goal today is to protect the well-being of the person who's at the heart of this whole thing.
So the key takeaway here is pretty clear. The government's focus has totally shifted from punishment to protection. This 10-year amnesty gives families a longer, much more realistic runway to secure a person's legal status. For anyone who qualifies, it's a clean slate. It wipes out all criminal, civil, and administrative liability. And, so importantly, by extending these rights to adults, the law says loud and clear, it is never too late to make things right.
And all of this really leaves us with the fundamental question that this whole legal evolution has been trying to answer. It's this delicate balancing act, right, between upholding the strict letter of the law and protecting the well-being of the person caught in the middle. And the journey from that 5-year window to a 10-year path shows one country's evolving and maybe, just maybe, more compassionate answer to that question.
Imagine you're holding a stack of legal documents, specifically Philippine penal codes and some recent republic acts.
Which, let's be honest, can look pretty intimidating.
Oh, absolutely. At first glance, it just looks like this dense, impenetrable wall of legalese, right?
Yeah, the kind of reading that usually puts people right to sleep.
Exactly. Just filled with endless clauses, subsections, and, archaic phrasing. But we're going to dig into it today.
Because there is actually a lot hiding in there.
Right. Hidden inside those dry paragraphs is a really fascinating, sometimes incredibly dark, and just deeply human story.
It really is.
It's the story about what makes you, you in the eyes of the law.
And it's a remarkable journey, honestly, when you strip away all that bureaucratic language.
Yeah.
When you actually examine the mechanics of these laws, you realize they aren't just arbitrary rules governing paperwork.
Right. They mean something more.
Exactly. They represent society's ongoing, desperate, and often highly complex battle to protect human identity at its most fundamental level.
So we're looking at a massive evolution of the Philippine legal framework today.
We are. We're starting from the older foundational bedrock of the Revised Penal Code.
And then moving all the way up to the Expanded Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2022.
Right. Which serves as this timeline of how human exploitation has evolved in the modern era.
And how the justice system has, had to adapt its understanding of identity to combat it.
Precisely.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore exactly that invisible thread.
To see how the law defines the absolute core of human identity.
Yes, and how it fiercely, almost ruthlessly, punishes those who steal or manipulate it.
And surprisingly, the specific circumstances where the state actually forgives those who fake it.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with a concept that sounds almost medieval, but is incredibly relevant today.
Article 348 of the Revised Penal Code.
Yes. It is called usurpation of civil status.
Usurpation of civil status. I mean, just the phrasing alone carries a lot of weight.
It sounds so dramatic.
It does. But to understand why this is treated as such a severe crime under Philippine law, we have to precisely define what civil status actually means in a legal context.
Right, because it's a term that gets thrown around casually.
Yeah, but it carries an immense burden. Civil status encompasses a person's public station in life.
Okay.
It includes their legally recognized rights, their duties to others, their capacities to act under the law.
And just as importantly, their incapacities. Right.
Exactly. It defines who you are in relation to the state and to your family.
So when someone commits usurpation,
they are representing themselves to be another specific person.
I see.
And by doing so, they are actively assuming that person's filiation.
Meaning their family lineage.
Right. Their family lineage, their parental rights, and their conjugal rights.
I was really trying to wrap my head around that specific definition when looking at the sources.
It can be a lot to take in.
Because honestly, civil status usually just sounds like a checkbox on a tax form, or a census survey.
Single, married, widowed.
Exactly. Divorced. But it's so much bigger than a checkbox.
Oh, absolutely.
I like to think of civil status like a character sheet in a role-playing game.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like if you play tabletop games or those expansive video games, you know that your character sheet is everything.
Right, it tells you exactly who you are in the game.
It lists your character's class, who their family is, their specific permissions to enter certain cities.
What factions they belong to, allegiances, inventory.
Exactly. Now, if a thief comes along and steals your credit card in the real world...
That's just taking some gold out of your inventory.
Right. It hurts, but you are still you.
You still have your character.
Yes. But usurpation of civil status, that isn't just stealing your gold.
Well,
it's stealing the entire character sheet. They're taking over your absolute existence within the game world.
That is a remarkably accurate and helpful way to look at it, actually.
Oh, thanks.
Because it perfectly captures the holistic nature of the crime. The state treats this as a profound, almost existential violation.
It goes way beyond a financial crime.
Far beyond it. In fact, if we look closely at how the law is applied, civil status even includes one's recognized profession.
Yeah, the law explicitly highlights the usurpation of profession as a prime example.
Right.
I saw that detail, and I really had to stop and think about the mechanics of it. petitioning for someone else's professional license.
It's a huge deal.
So if I somehow assume your identity, forge the necessary background, and start acting under your specific medical license.
Or engineering credentials.
Right. I am usurping your civil status. I'm not just pretending to know how to do a job.
You're physically hijacking the public trust.
Yes. And the specific societal station that you spent decades of your life building.
Exactly.
Like, I am walking into a hospital using your name and operating on people based on the authority granted to you.
What's fascinating here is how the law meticulously dissects the intent of the offender to categorize the crime.
The intent.
Yeah. The physical act of lying is only half the equation, really. The mental state of the perpetrator is everything.
So what they're thinking while they do it.
Exactly. For instance, the legal framework draws a very sharp line regarding fictitious names.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you just make up a random name for yourself, say you introduce yourself at a party.
Or even sign a non-legal document as a completely invented person?
Right. You have not committed usurpation of civil status under Article 348.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That falls under a completely different, generally lesser crime. Specifically Article 170A, regarding using a fictitious name to conceal a crime or evade execution of a judgment.
Because just making up a fake name doesn't mean I am actively stealing your specific character sheet.
Precisely.
I haven't stolen a life. I just drew up a blank, meaningless sheet for myself that has no ties to the real world.
Exactly. And let's take it a step further into the realm of fraud.
Okay.
What if you impersonate someone real, but you only do it for a fleeting moment to get their money?
Like a quick scam.
Yeah. Say you find out about a wealthy heir. You forge their signature, pretend to be them just long enough to cash a massive check at the bank.
And then you vanish.
Right. The law notes that this, while highly illegal, might simply be classified as estafa.
Which is the Philippine legal term for fraud under Article 315, right?
Yes, because you were stealing money, not an identity.
Ah, I see the distinction.
To actually cross the threshold and violate Article 348, to commit true usurpation of civil status, there must be the specific underlying intent to continuously enjoy the rights arising from someone else's civil status.
Enjoy the rights.
Yes.
Wow, those 3 words completely change the complexion of the crime.
They really do.
So it's not a smash and grab robbery where you take the money and run. Usurpation is moving into the person's house.
Yes, putting on their clothes.
Kissing their spouse, claiming their children as your own flesh and blood.
And operating their medical practice day after day.
You aren't just taking their assets. You want to live their legal and physical reality.
You want to overwrite their existence with your own. You want to assume their affiliation.
To graft yourself onto their family tree.
Exactly. And exercise their conjugal rights. And the legal system recognizes the unique horror of this.
How does it punish it?
Well, there is a significantly heavier penalty known as a qualifying circumstance if the usurpation is executed specifically with the purpose of defrauding the offended party or their legitimate heirs.
Think of someone taking over an identity specifically to alter a massive estate inheritance.
Completely disinheriting the true family members.
That's awful.
The state views the theft of a person's rightful place in the family hierarchy as one of the ultimate violations of the social order.
Because it destabilizes the very foundation of societal truth.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to a transition that is, frankly, genuinely difficult to talk about.
Yes.
But it's absolutely critical to understanding how deeply the law has to dig to protect the vulnerable.
Right.
We've been talking about stealing a life that someone has already built, like hijacking a car that's already speeding down the highway.
A fully formed identity.
Right. But what happens when the ultimate violation of civil status isn't hijacking a life that exists, but hijacking the factory line before the identity is even fully formed?
That's where things get very dark.
If stealing an adult's character sheet is usurpation, what do we call it when a syndicate steals a character sheet that hasn't even been filled out yet?
This leads us directly into the Expanded Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2022.
Republic Act number 9208 as amended.
Yes. And they use a phrase that completely stopped me in my tracks when I first read it.
Child laundering.
Child laundering.
It is a chilling, highly clinical term for an unspeakably dark practice.
It really is. The 2022 Act defines child laundering precisely. It's the act of stealing and selling a child to adopting parents under completely false pretenses.
But the key to understanding why it has its own specific legal definition lies in the methodology, doesn't it?
Exactly. It requires a highly coordinated scheme.
Falsifying the child's details, altering records,
or manipulating the child's true origins to make them appear to the outside world and to the legal system as an orphan or a legally abandoned foundling.
Let's focus on that word for a second, laundering.
Yeah.
Because we almost exclusively hear that word in the context of money laundering in the financial sector.
Right, with dirty money.
A cartel or a syndicate takes millions of dollars generated from illegal activities. They can't just put it in a bank.
So they run it through a complex network of shell companies.
Maybe a car wash or a casino. They create a massive fake paper trail.
And suddenly that dirty money comes out on the other side looking perfectly clean.
Taxed and legitimate to the international banking system.
Exactly.
But here, the law is talking about human beings being laundered.
Yes.
A child is taken, perhaps kidnapped or, coerced from a deeply loving but financially desperate family in a rural province.
And their entire human history is methodically wiped clean.
A fake paper trail is manufactured from scratch so they can be sold for massive profit to unsuspecting or sometimes fully complicit adopting parents.
It's a horrific supply chain.
I really need to understand the mechanics of this. How does a bureaucracy even allow a living human being's history to be completely erased and rewritten like that?
Well, it doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
And it certainly cannot happen through the actions of a single kidnapper.
Okay.
To successfully launder a child, you have to actively trick the legal system itself, which means you need a sophisticated supply chain of deception.
So it's not just a physical crime, it's a bureaucratic assault.
Yes. The traffickers have to procure or manufacture fake birth certificates.
Wow.
They have to generate fabricated police or barangay reports claiming the child is found abandoned in a specific location.
And they need fraudulent intake forms at complicit or negligent orphanages to establish a timeline of institutional care.
Exactly. The law recognizes this immense coordination, which is why child laundering is categorized under the much broader, heavily penalized umbrella of human trafficking.
Right. Section 4 of the Act lists a multitude of unlawful acts that make up this supply chain.
Recruiting, obtaining, harboring, or transferring a person through force, fraud, or deception.
And when you look at the purposes listed under the law for this trafficking, it is an absolute nightmare.
It's devastating.
The law explicitly details exploiting these laundered individuals for prostitution, pornography, sexual abuse, and the creation of child sexual abuse materials.
It also details forced labor, slavery, involuntary servitude.
And debt bondage, where the child is essentially working to pay off the costs of their own purchase.
And it even goes so far as to explicitly call out the act of introducing or matching Filipinos to foreign nationals for marriage.
Oh, referencing the Anti-Mail Order Spouse Act.
Right, with the specific intent to exploit them.
The systemic, organized nature of this exploitation is exactly what the 2022 Act was engineered to dismantle.
Yes. When a child is laundered to facilitate an illegal adoption or for trafficking purposes, the syndicate isn't just dealing in human flesh.
They're dealing in the commerce of fraudulent paperwork.
They are manufacturing a perfectly pristine, fake legal identity so that the final transaction, the adoption or the transfer of custody, looks entirely legitimate to a judge or a social worker reviewing the file.
And understanding that mechanical generation of a fake identity directly leads us into examining exactly how these lies are legally cemented in the first place.
Right.
That process is governed by an older but incredibly vital piece of legislation, Article 347 of the Revised Penal Code.
Which deals with the simulation of births.
Okay, yes, let's look at the actual mechanics of this, because the scenario described in the law is wild.
It's very specific.
Article 347 defines the simulation of births. It outlines a scenario where a woman physically pretends to be pregnant.
Right.
Then, on her supposed date of delivery, she takes the newborn child of another person.
And she then formally introduces this stranger into her own family structure.
With the specific intent to defraud legitimate heirs or to fundamentally alter the child's civil status.
Yes. And the law also defines a related act called substitution.
Which is the literal swapping of one child for another.
Exactly. The morbid example often given in legal texts is placing a live child of one woman in the place of a dead infant delivered by another woman.
All to cause the total loss of the trace of the live child's true filiation.
The concept of filiation is the absolute center of gravity here.
Okay, define that for us.
Filiation is the legal tracing of exactly who your parents are. It is your permanent anchor to the state's civil registry.
So when someone commits a simulation of birth,
they are actively severing a human being's true anchor and permanently attaching a fake one.
The law identifies two main actors who are held criminally liable as principals in this specific crime, right?
Yes. The woman who fakes the pregnancy and simulates the birth, and the person who actively furnishes or provides the child to her, knowing the intent.
Now, here is where I really have to push back a little, or at least ask you to help me untangle the philosophy of the law.
Okay, go for it.
Because there is a specific legal interpretation regarding this that feels incredibly counterintuitive, almost cruel.
I think I know where you're going with this.
According to established legal commentators on this article, it is stated that even if the child actually ends up getting a better life or a vastly superior social and economic status through this simulation, it is not a valid legal defense.
That is correct. It is not a defense.
But why is the justice system so uncompromisingly rigid here? Let's play this out realistically.
Sure.
If a child is taken from a situation of absolute grinding poverty or perhaps a highly abusive environment,
Right.
and is placed into a wealthy, loving, deeply supportive family through a simulated birth,
Okay.
why does the state still drop the hammer and send those new parents to prison? From a purely pragmatic standpoint, the child is objectively better off.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look past the individual emotional outcome
Okay.
and examine what the state is fundamentally required to value in the context of a penal code. The law is designed to ruthlessly punish the creation of a false status.
The false state.
Yes. The entire apparatus of a functioning society of the state relies entirely on the absolute unshakable truth of the civil registry.
Ah.
If the registry is allowed to be compromised, even for what seems like a benevolent reason, the entire systemic structure begins to collapse.
So you're saying it's not just about judging the individual child's daily comfort or happiness.
No, it's about protecting the structural integrity of the state's memory.
The state's memory. That's a fascinating way to put it.
Think about the domino effect of a simulated birth. The creation of a false status is an immediate, devastating detriment to the members of the family into which the child is fraudulently introduced.
Because it instantly defrauds legitimate heirs of their rightful inheritance.
Exactly. It alters who has the right to make medical decisions.
It changes the lineage of citizenship.
Yes. Therefore, it is classified as a crime against public truth.
Wow.
To highlight exactly how specific and targeted the law is regarding this tampering, legal scholars provide a really fascinating counterexample.
Oh, I love these. What is it?
Imagine a woman who pretends to give birth solely to belie a reputation of sterility within her community.
Okay, so she just wants her neighbors to think she's capable of having a child to stop the gossip.
Exactly. But crucially, she doesn't actually introduce a stranger into the family. She doesn't cause any loss of legal status to a real, living child.
And no immediate damage is incurred to any heirs.
Right. Under this specific statute, Article 347, she commits no crime.
Wait, really?
Really?
So if she just stuffs a pillow under her shirt for 9 months, walks around town talking about her cravings to stop the neighborhood gossips,
Yeah.
but eventually just says she lost the baby and never actually produces a stolen human being, she hasn't violated the law against simulating a birth.
Correct. She may have lied to her neighbors, but the core of the crime under Article 347 isn't the theatrical lie about the pregnancy itself.
It's the physical tampering.
Yes, the core of the crime is the actual physical tampering with another human being's true filiation.
It requires altering the legal reality of a living child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without a child being severed from their true anchor, there is no usurpation of civil status.
That distinction is incredible, and it perfectly illustrates how surgical the law tries to be.
It has to be very precise.
And that precision brings us to what I think is the most intricate, nuanced, and honestly mind-bending legal distinction in this entire subject.
Okay, I'm ready.
It is about the mind of the offender when it comes to the physical act of abandonment.
Ah, yes. The legal nuances of abandoning a legitimate child. This is where the application of the law becomes almost indistinguishable from a deep psychological study.
Exactly, because the exact same physical action, a mother walking away from her baby, is categorized into completely different, incredibly severe crimes.
Entirely based on the invisible, silent thoughts locked inside her head at the moment she walks away.
Let's really break this down. The law defines abandonment in the context of Article 347, but it notes that this must be understood based on historical context. Specifically, the old Spanish practice of leaving newborn infants at the doors of hospitals, churches, or religious institutions.
Equipped with what they used to call tornos, or revolving doors for anonymous drop-offs.
Right.
So abandon, in this specific legal sense, cannot just mean leaving a child alone in a room while you go to the store.
No.
It must be understood in that specific historical context. It means permanently leaving a child in a public place or an institution where others are highly likely to find it.
But the criminal charge you face doesn't depend on the fact that you left the child.
No, it depends entirely on why you left the child.
Okay, let's run through the hypotheticals to see how the law categorizes human desperation versus human malice.
We'll go.
Scenario 1. A mother is completely overwhelmed, perhaps suffering from severe postpartum depression or crushing poverty.
Okay.
She abandons the child at a busy hospital purely to avoid the overwhelming obligation and duty of rearing and caring for it. She just needs to escape the responsibility. What is the charge?
In that specific scenario, where the intent is solely to escape parental duty, the charge is under Article 276. Abandoning a minor.
So it is a crime.
It is a crime, certainly, but it recognizes the intent was evasion of duty, not necessarily malice toward the child's identity or life.
Okay, scenario 2. A wealthy widow with children from a previous marriage has a new baby with a new partner.
Oh, this is a classic example.
She realizes this new baby will split the massive estate, so she abandons the newborn specifically to preserve the inheritance of her older children. She wants the new baby completely out of the picture legally.
That changes the dynamic entirely. The evident purpose there is specifically to cause the newborn to permanently lose its civil status and filiation, so it cannot legally share in the inheritance.
The target of the crime isn't the burden of care.
No. The target is the child's legal identity and rightful property. That is penalized severely under Article 347, concealing or abandoning a legitimate child to cause the loss of civil status.
Scenario 3, and this is where it gets incredibly dark. A woman abandons her newborn child in the midst of a dense, lonely forest miles from civilization. By sheer miraculous luck, the baby just happens to be found alive by a passing hunter who takes it home.
Even though the child survived and was found, the legal charge would likely be attempted infanticide.
Why? She just left it, same as the hospital.
Because leaving a newborn in a condition and an environment where it inherently cannot survive, like a lonely, isolated forest without food or warmth, shows a clear, overriding intent against the life of the child itself.
The intent wasn't to let someone else raise it.
Exactly. The intent was for the child to cease to exist.
And scenario 4, which really surprised me, a father unlawfully and secretly sells his newborn child to a broker or an illicit agency, signing a paper agreeing never to claim the child again. You would naturally think that is the ultimate form of abandonment.
It sounds like it.
But the legal precedent explicitly cites a case, U.S. versus Capillo, stating this is not abandonment under Article 347.
Right.
Why not? He literally gave the kid away forever.
It is not abandonment under Article 347, because the legal definition requires the child to be left in a public place with the specific intent that they lose their trace of filiation to the world.
Oh.
In the case of selling a child, the baby wasn't left to the elements or the public. It was handed directly from one specific person to another specific person.
Oh, wow.
Now, to be absolutely clear, that act of selling the child is horrifically illegal and heavily penalized under other laws.
Right. The severe anti-trafficking statutes we discussed earlier.
Exactly. The father would face massive prison time. But the law is precise. It doesn't fit the strict legal framework of abandonment to cause loss of civil status.
Because the chain of custody, albeit illegal, was never technically broken by leaving the child in the unknown public sphere.
Exactly.
I am just struck by the immense difficulty of this from a judicial perspective. The physical act in the first 3 scenarios is visually identical.
A parent places a child down and walks away.
Yes. But the legal system has to somehow peer into the offender's soul to figure out if she was tired, if she was greedy, or if she was murderous.
It's a daunting task.
How does a judge in a courtroom even begin to prove what she was thinking months or years after the fact? You can't put an X-ray on human intent. Was she running from duty, protecting a trust fund, or trying to end a life?
This raises an important question, one that the legal system has grappled with for centuries. How do you definitively prove invisible thoughts?
Exactly.
The answer, deeply explored by legal commentators like Croizard, relies on the judicial doctrine of legal presumptions based on circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
The court has to look at the silent witnesses surrounding the act.
Legal presumptions, meaning the court officially assumes a specific intent is true based on the undeniable physical context of the action.
Exactly. The court reads the environment.
Right.
For example, if you leave a newborn child bundled up in warm blankets right at the front door of a well-known charitable institution, a busy hospital, or a church.
The legal presumption is that you actively want the child to survive.
Yes. You purposefully left it in a location where it would be shielded from the first inclemencies of the weather and where capable people are guaranteed to find it quickly.
Therefore, the court presumes your intent was not murder.
Right. Your intent was to ensure it lived, but to cause the absolute loss of the trace of its filiation to you.
You want it to live, but you want it to lose its civil status.
And that specific environmental context points directly to Article 347.
But if the environment changes?
Conversely, if you leave that exact same bundled child in a lonely forest, an abandoned building, or a trash receptacle.
The environment itself is inherently hostile to human life.
Exactly. The court does not need a written confession to know your intent. The court presumes your intent was that the child would succumb to the elements and die.
Leading directly to an infanticide or attempted infanticide charge.
Yes. The environment where the abandonment takes place speaks for the silent, hidden intent of the offender.
That is profound. The environment speaks for the silent intent.
It's the only way the law can function in these cases.
And unfortunately, as we move forward in the timeline of these laws, we see that the intent to sever a child's filiation has evolved from acts of individual desperation into something heavily, brutally commercialized.
Yes, it becomes a business.
We are looking at Republic Act Num 7610 and Republic Act number 11642.
Which specifically target the modern trafficking supply chain.
And what stands out is that this legislation isn't just waiting for the final tragic act of selling a child to occur. The law aggressively penalizes the attempted crimes of child trafficking.
The state recognized that waiting for the transaction to be completed was failing the victims.
You have to act sooner.
The net had to be cast very wide and very early to catch the entire ecosystem of exploitation before the child is fully removed from the system.
RA 7610 penalizes acts that constitute a mere attempt to commit child trafficking,
punishing these preparatory acts just 2 degrees lower than the fully consummated crime.
The examples provided in the legal texts of these preparatory acts are bleak because they show exactly how syndicates operate.
They're horrifying.
It lists a pregnant mother executing an affidavit of consent for adoption in exchange for a consideration, which is the legal term for money or goods.
Right.
It lists agencies or individual brokers actively recruiting vulnerable women specifically to bear children for the sole purpose of child trafficking.
It's a literal factory.
And this next one really got me. It criminalizes engaging in the act of finding children among low-income families, hospitals, rural clinics, nurseries, or daycare centers to offer them for trafficking.
Yes.
It literally turns systemic poverty into a hunting ground for syndicates. They are treating maternity wards in poor provinces like wholesale warehouses.
It is a devastating reality. The law actively acknowledges that human trafficking inherently preys on systemic vulnerability and poverty.
And the penalties reflect the absolute severity of treating human beings as commercial inventory.
If we look at the penalty structures, they are designed to be entirely prohibitive.
Okay, break those down for us.
For an individual who acts alone to commit the simulation of birth, say a rogue facilitator, causing the fictitious registration of a child under a non-biological parent for a fee.
Right.
The penalty is 8 to 10 years of strict imprisonment, plus a substantial fine.
But if it's done by an organized syndicate, the punishment skyrockets.
Correct. The law specifically defines a syndicate in this context as a group of 3 or more persons conspiring or confederating with one another to carry out these acts.
And what's the penalty for them?
If a syndicate is involved, or if the act constitutes large-scale child trafficking, it merits the absolute maximum penalty of reclusion perpetua.
Wow. Which translates to what in years?
Imprisonment ranging from 20 to 40 years, with no possibility of parole in many circumstances.
But there's another layer to the penalties that caught my eye, and it has to do with the professionals who facilitate this.
Yes, the medical professionals.
It states that any physician, midwife, nurse, or hospital personnel who cooperates in the execution of the crime of simulation of birth doesn't just face the standard prison time.
Yeah.
They face the additional penalty of permanent disqualification from the practice of their profession.
And we must emphasize exactly why the law includes that permanent professional execution, so to speak, on top of the severe prison time.
Because they should know better.
It's more than just knowing better.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about child laundering requiring a complex supply chain of deception.
Right.
Medical professionals are the vital, indispensable links in that chain. They're the ultimate gatekeepers of the civil registry.
When a doctor or a licensed midwife signs a birth certificate or falsifies a footprint record,
they are officially forging the legal reality of that child. The bureaucracy trusts their signature implicitly.
Their signature is the magic wand that turns a kidnapping into a legal fact. It turns a lie into truth within the state's memory.
Exactly. So when a doctor or a nurse participates in a simulated birth, it is viewed as a profound, unforgivable betrayal of their professional oath and the public trust.
They are abusing a massive amount of power.
Society gives medical personnel the extraordinary power to officially declare life, death, and human identity.
And when they weaponize that power to facilitate human trafficking,
The state says they have forfeited their right to ever hold that power again. They can never be trusted with that public station.
by usurping the child's identity, the professional permanently loses their own professional civil status.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. The gravity of the crime demands a complete permanent excision from the medical system.
It really does.
Now, up until this point in our deep dive, we've been painting a very grim, highly punitive picture.
We have.
The law acts as a heavy hammer coming down on identity thieves, child launderers, and corrupt doctors.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. In exploring the full breadth of these statutes, we hit a massive plot twist.
A very unexpected one.
After all this talk of reclusion perpetua and permanent disqualification, the law actually carves out a highly specific path to forgiveness.
It does, and it represents a fascinating progressive shift in legal philosophy.
Okay.
We see this transition begin with Republic Act number 8552, the Domestic Adoption Act of 1998, and later fully realized in Republic Act number 1122.
Appropriately known as the Simulated Birth Rectification Act.
Yes, these laws introduced the extraordinary concept of a legal moratorium.
A moratorium, a legal pause, a grace period, an amnesty of sorts.
Right.
Let me try to paint a picture of why a family might actually desperately need this, because I think it helps ground this dense legal concept in human reality.
That's a great idea.
Imagine a loving family. Maybe they live in a rural, deeply impoverished area. They don't have a lot of money. They have limited education, and they simply couldn't navigate the incredibly complex, highly expensive, and deeply intimidating legal adoption system.
Which can take years, by the way.
Exactly. But a child in their community, perhaps an orphan or a baby from a mother who couldn't cope, desperately needed a home.
Right.
So they did what they thought was the most pragmatic, loving thing to do in the moment. They just paid the local midwife a little extra money to put their own names on the official birth certificate.
Just a shortcut.
To them, it was just a piece of paper to make the love official. They loved the child. They raised the child, provided a safe home, paid for their education, and integrated them into the community.
Technically.
Technically, legally, under Article 347, they committed a massive felony, they simulated a birth, they actively tampered with the integrity of the civil registry.
It did.
For years, maybe decades, this family has been living with a ticking time bomb under their roof.
That constant fear.
They are terrified that if the child ever needs a passport or a background check for a job, someone will look too closely at the paperwork, the parents will be sent to prison for a decade, and the child will be violently torn away and put into state custody.
That heartbreaking scenario is exactly the reality that these moratoriums were designed to address.
The state eventually had to recognize a severe destructive conflict between two of its own primary goals.
Right. The need to punish those who tamper with the vital civil registry versus the paramount directive to protect the welfare and stability of the child.
Tearing apart a loving, deeply functional family to rigidly punish a paperwork crime committed years ago out of desperation actually inflicts massive trauma on the very child the law is supposedly trying to protect.
It's the law realizing that sometimes the cure is worse than the disease.
So RA 11222 essentially hits the reset button for these specific families. The law details a 10-year moratorium.
Yes.
It states that all criminal, civil, and administrative liabilities for the act of simulation of birth are completely extinguished, wiped clean.
But only if certain very strict non-negotiable conditions are met.
Yes, it is vital to note it is not a blanket amnesty for traffickers.
Definitely not. The conditions are meticulously designed to protect the genuine families.
What are they?
First, the simulation of the birth must have been committed prior to the effectivity of the law, RA 1122.
You can't do it now and ask for forgiveness later.
Exactly. Second, the court must determine that the simulation was made explicitly for the best interest of the child, not for trafficking or inheritance fraud.
Makes sense.
Third, and this is crucial, the child must have been consistently considered and treated as a true son or daughter by the purported parents.
There must be a proven history of love and care.
Right. And fourth, a formal petition for legal adoption, along with an application for the official correction of the simulated birth record, must be filed within 10 years from the effectivity of the act.
It is essentially the state opening its arms and saying, come out of the shadows.
Stop hiding.
Tell us the truth about how the civil registry was altered, officially and legally adopt the child through the proper safety channels so we know they are safe, and in return, we will completely forgive the crime of the fake birth certificate.
It's prioritizing actual human reality and family bonds over bureaucratic perfection.
It is a profound, beautifully implemented example of restorative justice.
The state is humbly admitting that its own rigid, slow, or overly expensive legal procedures might have inadvertently driven well-meaning, desperate people to commit a felony out of pure love.
And notably, to show how far this grace extends, the law explicitly mentions that all the benefits of RAA 11222 extend and apply even to adult adoptees.
Right.
So even if the child whose birth was simulated is now 30 years old, fully grown with a family of their own, the parents can still come forward.
Rectify the legal fiction. Fix the historical record.
And finally, sleep soundly without the fear of facing prison time.
That is genuinely beautiful.
It really is. It manages to repair the sanctity of the civil registry while keeping the family entirely intact and removing the shadow of fear.
Which perfectly brings us to the final piece of the legal puzzle we are examining today.
Found in the newer RA 11642.
Right. Throughout this entire deep dive, we've talked about protecting the paper trail.
We've talked about fixing the registry, punishing the traffickers, and defining civil status.
But this specific provision takes a massive step further into protecting the actual day-to-day lived experience of the person.
Yes. RA 11642 includes a highly specific, very modern provision penalizing adoption discrimination.
It explicitly prohibits malicious acts, including labeling, shaming, bullying, and creating negative stigma regarding a person's adoption status.
And it backs up this prohibition with actual teeth. Right.
Fines ranging from 10,000 to 20,000 pesos at the discretion of the court for those who engage in this discrimination.
I found this remarkable when reading through the laws because it feels so incredibly rare to see the state specifically criminalize social behavior, like shaming or labeling in the context of family dynamics.
It is very rare.
Usually the law governs property, violence, and theft. It usually stays far away from the playground, the neighborhood gossip circle, or family arguments.
But here, the state is actively stepping in to police and protect the social dignity of the adoptee.
If we synthesize this anti-discrimination provision with everything else we've discussed in our deep dive, it makes perfect logical sense.
The state is realizing that its job doesn't end the moment the civil registry is finally corrected.
Or the moment the traffickers are locked in a cell.
The true overarching goal of all these intertwining laws, from Article 348 to the moratoriums, is to protect the dignity, the identity, and the peace of the human being.
The law is finally recognizing that a person's civil status isn't just a piece of paper locked in a government filing cabinet in Manila.
Civil status is fundamentally defined by how society treats that person every single day.
Right. If a child is legally perfectly adopted, but they are constantly socially ostracized, whispered about, or bullied because of their biological origins,
their civil status is still being actively undermined. They are not being allowed to fully inhabit their identity.
The law is attempting to create a legally enforced protective bubble around the adoptee's new, hard-won reality.
That's such a powerful, holistic way to look at it. The law isn't just a shield against kidnappers.
It's a shield against the stigma that follows.
Exactly.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with the audacious theft of adult identities, exploring how usurping a civil status isn't just fraud, but stealing someone's entire character sheet in the game of life.
Their profession, their lineage, their conjugal rights.
We descended into the incredibly dark, highly organized underworld of child laundering, looking at how trafficking syndicates manufacture fake paper trails, compromise medical professionals, and turn systemic poverty into a hunting ground.
We explore the dizzying psychological tightrope of abandonment,
where a single physical act, leaving a child, can be judged as fleeing duty, protecting a trust fund, or attempted murder, all based on the silent intent of the parent and the environment they choose.
And finally, we emerge into the light of restorative justice,
where the state offers a 10-year moratorium to heal terrified families and enacts anti-bullying laws to protect the daily dignity of the adopted child.
It really highlights how beautifully complex the concept of human identity is. It is not just one thing.
No, it's not.
It is a biological fact, it is a rigid legal document, and it is an ongoing social agreement, all woven together by a legal system trying its best to keep up with human nature.
Exactly. This deep dive serves as a powerful reminder to you, the listener, that the dusty documents sitting in those government filing cabinets aren't just bureaucracy.
They aren't just red tape designed to slow down your day.
They are the actual legal armor protecting our most fundamental human right. The right to know exactly who we are, who we belong to, and our rightful place in society.
Perfectly said.
But looking at how much effort it takes to protect physical identity does leave me with one final lingering question. Given everything we've explored today about how vigorously and meticulously the law protects the physical and paper trail of human birth, what happens tomorrow?
That's a huge question.
As we accelerate into an era of advanced artificial intelligence, incredibly convincing deepfakes, and purely digital, decentralized documentation, what will usurpation of civil status or even child laundering look like when our identities become entirely virtual?
It's terrifying to consider.
Will our current legal frameworks, which were painstakingly built on the physical reality of biology, hospital doors, and stamped paper, be able to handle the malicious simulation of a life that never physically existed at all? Something for you to think about until next time.
Welcome to the debate. So I want you to think for a moment about a masterpiece painting.
Okay, I'm with you.
Like, let's say, a lost Da Vinci or a Vermeer. If an art historian suddenly discovers that a famous painting hanging in a museum is actually a brilliant forgery, well, the art world demands it be removed immediately, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the value of the piece is entirely dependent on its authenticity.
Right.
The provenance, that unbroken, documented chain of origin is everything. If the origin is a lie, the painting's status in the institution is completely nullified. A forgery is basically viewed as a crime against truth.
Exactly. But what if we aren't talking about paints on a canvas? What if that forgery is actually a child's birth record?
That definitely changes the stakes.
It really does. And what if it hasn't been hanging in a museum, but has been the foundational document of a loving family for 20 years? Do you rip that family apart to satisfy the demand for absolute historical truth?
That's the hard question, isn't it?
Right. Or do you protect the human bond that has grown around that piece of paper?
Well, I mean, when it comes to canvas and paint, you just take it down. But when it comes to human beings, the civil registry and the law, the stakes of origin and identity become infinitely more complex and, frankly, far more dangerous.
Yeah, and that tension is exactly what we are exploring today. We are examining the Philippine legal framework surrounding child identity.
Specifically focusing on the Expanded Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2022.
Yes, and how it intersects with various penal codes. At the heart of our discussion is a profound legal question. Can a justice system effectively protect vulnerable children from human trafficking by strictly punishing the alteration of birth records,
right,
while simultaneously offering a 10-year amnesty window to forgive those exact same falsifications under the Simulated Birth Rectification Act, also known as RA 11222?
Which is just, honestly, a massive contradiction on paper.
See, I actually see it differently. I'll be taking the stance today that this legal framework is a bit of a pragmatic masterpiece.
Wow.
I really think so. I think it rightfully and very carefully distinguishes the malicious exploitation of child laundering from benevolent, albeit historically informal, family formations. It recognizes human reality.
And I come at it from a completely different angle. I'll be arguing that this framework is conceptually contradictory and incredibly risky.
Okay, lay out your perspective.
Well, offering administrative amnesty for birth simulation undermines the absolute foundational right to a true civil status. By trying to have it both ways, I think the law creates dangerous ambiguities in the very real fight against human trafficking.
So let's start by laying out why the framework is set up this way and why I believe it's highly effective. It all comes down to a laser focus on the actual harm being committed.
Okay.
If you look at the Expanded Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2022, it explicitly defines child laundering. And we aren't talking about a simple paperwork error here.
No, not at all. It's a severe criminal enterprise.
Exactly. Child laundering refers to the act of stealing and selling a child under false pretenses. This means using schemes like falsifying the child's details or manipulating their origins to make them appear as an orphan or a foundling to adopting parents.
Right.
The law aggressively targets the exploiters here. If this is done by a syndicate, meaning 3 or more people, we are talking about 20 to 40 years of imprisonment for child trafficking. It is a heavy, uncompromising hammer.
Which it absolutely should be.
Right. But the law also recognizes that not every falsified birth certificate is the work of a syndicate.
Okay, but it's still falsified.
True. But the Simulated Birth Rectification Act, RA 11222, steps in compassionately to protect children who are already living in stable, loving homes. It provides a 10-year window to correct those records, provided the simulation was genuinely in the child's best interest. So it punishes the predator, but protects the child's established life.
I mean, I understand the emotional appeal of that argument. It sounds incredibly humane on the surface.
Because it is humane.
But I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because a legal system has to be built on a coherent foundation. This dual approach compromises its own principles. Let's look at the Revised Penal Code, specifically Article 347.
The Simulation of Births Code.
Exactly. The crime here isn't just about the physical danger of trafficking. It is fundamentally about causing the loss of traces of a child's filiation.
Let's clarify filiation for a second, just so everyone is on the same page.
Sure, yeah. Filiation is just a technical legal term for tracing your biological roots. It is your legally recognized parentage. Article 347 makes it a crime to erase those roots.
Right.
The respected legal commentator Viada makes a crucial point on this that we really cannot ignore. He notes that the fact a child might gain a better legal status or a more comfortable life through a simulation is explicitly not a defense.
Meaning, even if you gave the kid a mansion and a great education, you still committed the crime.
Exactly. Why? Because the law must punish the creation of a false status to the detriment of the family and society. Allowing a 10-year moratorium for rectification under RA 112222 inherently contradicts this strict penal code.
You think it blurs the lines too much?
It entirely blurs the lines. When you forgive the falsification of the civil registry just because the outcome seems socially acceptable, you make it nearly impossible to draw a hard line against illegal adoption. You're basically saying the ends justify the means.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. I think we need to look closer at what Article 347 is actually policing and why it was written the way it was in the first place.
Go on.
This is an older penal code. The harm it is obsessed with isn't necessarily the psychological safety of the child. It's largely about the usurpation of civil status.
Well, usurpation is still a crime.
Yes, but historically, laws like this were designed to prevent defrauding legitimate heirs out of their inheritance. It was about protecting ancestral wealth and bloodlines from imposters. It wasn't about the child's emotional well-being.
Which is still a massive violation of civil rights. It is the total erasure of a biological lineage. It strips a person of their right to know exactly where they came from.
It does, but we have to ask ourselves, shouldn't modern law prioritize a child's social and lived reality over pure biological tracing? Look at RA 116040, the Domestic Administrative Adoption Act.
Okay.
That modern law criminalizes obtaining consent for adoption through coercion, fraud, or exposing the child to danger. That is where the real harm lies today. If a child is safe, loved, and cared for, why shouldn't the law prioritize their lived reality?
Because lived reality doesn't erase biological truth.
But think about how we handle property disputes. If someone unknowingly builds a house on a forgotten corner of your land and lives there openly for 30 years, maintaining the property and raising a family, the law doesn't just bulldoze the house.
Are we comparing children to real estate now?
It's an analogy. The law eventually recognizes the productive, lived reality and grants them the title through adverse possession. Why wouldn't we apply that same pragmatic grace to a long-term, loving family unit?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. A human being is not an acre of dirt.
Fair enough. It's not a perfect parallel.
You cannot squat on a child's civil status and eventually earn the title of parent simply because enough time has passed. The property analogy fails because real estate doesn't have a fundamental human right to know its own history. A child does.
But if they are loved,
Even if they are loved, when you simulate a birth, you are stealing that child's history, you are severing their biological ties without their consent. And my larger issue isn't just the philosophy of it, it's the glaring mechanical contradiction and how the state tries to selectively apply this grace.
what do you mean by selective?
Look at how the law treats the facilitators. Let's talk about the hospital staff. Under RA 1164-2, any physician, midwife, nurse, or hospital personnel who cooperates in simulating a birth faces permanent disqualification from their profession.
Wait, permanent? As in, they lose their medical license forever?
Forever. Not to mention 8 to 10 years in prison and a 50,000 peso fine.
Wow, okay.
Birth record, while simultaneously turning around and granting the parents who orchestrated the entire thing a 10-year moratorium to seamlessly rectify it.
I see the tension there.
It is completely disconnected from reality. The state is essentially saying, we will ruin the person you hired to commit this crime, but we will give you administrative amnesty.
I see why you think that's a contradiction. It sounds incredibly hypocritical on the surface, but I think it actually reveals a very sophisticated enforcement strategy. It is the difference between attacking the supply chain versus managing the existing stock.
The supply chain of children?
Exactly. The permanent disqualification of medical professionals is an absolute necessity to stop the machinery of child trafficking. How does a child laundering syndicate actually work?
They need people on the inside.
Right. They need infrastructure. They need doctors to sign forms. They need midwives to lie about who delivered the baby. They need hospital staff to look the other way. The medical professionals are the gatekeepers. You have to shut that down with draconian penalties to break the syndicate.
But if the act of falsifying the record is so evil that a doctor goes to prison for a decade, the parents who paid the doctor shouldn't get a free pass. That's my point.
But it's not a free pass. The moratorium under RA 1122 is designed to deal humanely with the complex family situations that already exist, and it is a highly conditional shield.
It's an administrative escape hatch.
It's a structured pathway to the truth. The moratorium only applies if the simulation occurred prior to the effectivity of the act. You can't just do it moving forward.
Okay, but retroactively, it's still amnesty. Furthermore, the child must have been consistently treated as a son or daughter, and most importantly, it requires filing a formal petition for adoption along with the application for correction.
So they eventually do the right paperwork?
Yes. The state is forcing the family out of the shadows and into the legal light. It destroys the trafficking infrastructure moving forward by terrifying the doctors, but it refuses to traumatize the child by destroying their current family retroactively.
That is a compelling argument, I'll admit, and I do see the logic in targeting the gatekeepers. But have you considered how heavily this entire framework relies on proving subjective intent?
What do you mean?
The pivot you just made from the quote-unquote bad doctor to the well-meaning parent hinges entirely on the state's ability to perfectly discern the inner motives of the people involved. Intent is a core component of criminal law, though. That's not new.
Yes, but this framework pushes it to an extreme. You're saying we forgive the parents because they acted out of love, but we crush the doctor because they are part of a supply chain. What if the doctor also acted out of love?
How so?
What if the doctor knew the biological mother was going to abandon the baby in a trash can, so they quietly handed the baby to a desperate, loving couple and falsified the form to keep the child out of an overwhelmed orphanage?
That's a highly specific scenario.
But it happens. The doctor goes to prison for 10 years, and the parents get amnesty. The law makes distinguishing these motives incredibly fragile.
I hear you, but I actually think the Philippine Penal Code is remarkably precise in how it dissects intent. We don't have to guess. The law provides the roadmap.
I'm skeptical of that roadmap.
Well, take the crime of abandoning a child. The code creates brilliant micro-distinctions based entirely on the offender's subjective intent.
Give me an example.
Okay, let's say a mother leaves her newborn child in a lonely, remote forest.
Where the child will likely die.
Exactly. Because the likely outcome is death, the law treats that as attempted infanticide.
But let's change the scenario. Say she leaves the child on the steps of a hospital or a church simply to avoid the obligations of rearing and caring for it. She just wants out.
Okay, so that's different.
Right.
That falls under Article 276, which is abandoning a minor.
Right, the intent there is just to shirk responsibility, not to kill. Exactly. Now, let's look at a third scenario. What if that same mother leaves the child in a safe place, but she does it specifically to preserve an inheritance for her other children from a former marriage? She wants this new baby out of the will.
I see where you're going with this.
That becomes abandonment under Article 347. Why? Because the specific intent there is to cause the child to lose its civil status, so it cannot share in the wealth. It is the exact same physical act in the last two scenarios, leaving a child in a safe place, but the law punishes it differently, based on the invisible mechanism of intent.
Okay, I followed the logic.
So if the law can handle that level of precision for abandonment, it is entirely capable of distinguishing a trafficker from a well-meaning, informal adoptive parent.
I understand how it works in a textbook, but that precision on paper is exactly what makes the law an investigator's nightmare in practice.
How so? It seems pretty clear to me.
Because relying on micro distinctions of intent retroactively is nearly impossible. If intent is so crucial, how can the state accurately assess the best interest of the child to grant this amnesty a decade later?
They use social workers, courts.
Are we supposed to put a mother on the stand 10 years after the fact and ask her to perfectly recall her state of mind? We are asking social workers and judges to look into the past and certify that a falsified birth certificate was born of pure intentions.
It requires investigation, sure.
And the absurdity reaches its absolute peak when you realize that RA 1122 even extends the benefits of rectification to adult adoptees.
Oh, I actually think extending it to adults is a vital feature.
Wait, really? It's bizarre.
Why? I mean, it allows adults who discover their records were simulated when they were babies to normalize their legal standing without criminalizing the elderly parents who raised them.
But it proves the law has abandoned objective truth for social comfort. Let me give you the ultimate contradiction in this entire framework.
All right, let's hear it.
Under RA 1164-2, the state will issue a 10,000 to 20,000 peso fine for adoption discrimination.
Right, which means labeling, shaming, or creating a negative stigma around someone because they are adopted.
Exactly. And that's a good thing. We shouldn't shame adoptees. But look at the hypocrisy. We have a system that will financially penalize a citizen for pointing out the truth of an adoption to protect the child's feelings, while simultaneously allowing a family to entirely erase a biological identity through simulated birth rectification.
I think those serve different protective purposes.
But you cannot criminalize the usurpation of civil status under Article 348.
Which is basically identity theft for gain.
Yes, strictly punishing someone for representing themselves as another to enjoy their rights. You can't punish that while concurrently offering a legal mechanism that officially sanctions a false historical narrative for a family. The law's talking out of both sides of its mouth.
I don't think it is, though.
It wants the truth when it's convenient for punishing syndicates, and it wants to ignore the truth when it's convenient for protecting informal adoptions.
I don't believe it's talking out of both sides of its mouth at all. I believe it's speaking two different languages because it's dealing with two radically different realities.
How are they radically different?
A lie is a lie. You brought up the usurpation of civil status under Article 348. As we just clarified, that is fundamentally about fraud for financial or social gain. It's an adult pretending to be someone else to steal an inheritance or a right. That is predatory behavior.
Agreed. But a family taking in a vulnerable child, raising them, educating them, and loving them, even if it began with a falsified document because they didn't have the resources or access to navigate the formal, expensive adoption system, that is fundamentally protective behavior. It's still based on a false document, though. The law's willingness to look at the human outcome rather than just the rigid text of the civil registry is its greatest strength. It is saying that the spirit of the law is to protect the child, and sometimes the letter of the law, the strict civil registry, gets in the way of that protection. But the risk is that by creating these administrative escape hatches, you provide cover for the very syndicates you are trying to destroy. Provide cover? How? How does a child laundering syndicate operate? They rely on demand. If a buyer knows that a falsified birth record can eventually be rectified after a decade of the child living with them, you have effectively created a statute of limitations on the enforcement of civil truth.
That's a dark way to look at it, but I see the logic.
It's the reality of how criminal networks exploit loopholes. You say it protects families, and I concede that in many cases it absolutely does. It keeps good people out of jail.
Which is important.
But it also creates a massive systemic vulnerability. By sending the message, we will eventually forgive this if the child seems okay, we weaken the absolute deterrent that the Anti-Trafficking Act is supposed to provide. A law designed to protect children shouldn't have a backdoor that incentivizes the initial crime.
I hear that concern, and it's a vital one. If the amnesty window becomes a tool for traffickers to wash their hands of the crime, the whole system collapses. It's clear that as we look at this, we are looking at a system trying to balance incredible extremes. Let me try to summarize where I stand on this.
Please do.
I believe the Philippine framework succeeds precisely because it is uniquely adapted to human complexity. It wields a terrifying sword against syndicates, with up to 40 years imprisonment for child laundering under the 2022 Act.
Right.
It permanently strips the licenses of corrupt medical professionals, but it also carries a shield through the structured, highly conditional moratoriums of RA 11222. It protects established, loving families from being destroyed by the very laws meant to safeguard children. It understands that justice without mercy isn't justice at all, especially when the collateral damage would be uprooting a child's established life.
And to summarize my position, I look at the exact same material and I see a system at war with itself. It attempts to rigidly define and protect the sanctity of civil status, criminalizing the loss of affiliation under Article 347 and usurpation under Article 348.
Yeah.
Yet simultaneously, it offers broad administrative escape hatches that can obscure the very traces of identity the law claims to protect. When you permanently ruin the doctor who alters the record, but forgive the parent who commissioned the alteration, you don't have a masterpiece of jurisprudence.
You think it's broken.
You have a conceptual fracture. And my fear is that this fracture will easily be exploited by the very traffickers we are trying to stop.
I think where we absolutely converge is on the gravity of the issue. Both of us see in these legal texts a profound, desperate commitment by the state to address the absolute horrors of child laundering and human trafficking.
Absolutely. The penalties alone, life-altering prison sentences and massive fines prove that the state is not taking the commodification of children lightly.
We definitely agree on that. The commitment to stopping the buying and selling of human beings is clear and commendable. Where we will have to remain in disagreement is whether an intent-based amnesty, like the 10-year moratorium, actually strengthens that protective framework by bringing people out of the shadows and into the legal system.
Right, or if it introduces a fatal conceptual flaw that undermines a person's absolute right to know their true identity.
It's an incredibly difficult line to walk. It brings us right back to our original thought experiment. Using rigid legal text to govern the messy, deeply emotional realities of family and identity is like trying to determine the value of a masterpiece painting purely by staring at its paperwork while completely ignoring the beauty of the image on the canvas.
It's a tough balance.
Does the provenance matter more than the picture? The law is trying to honor both, but as we've seen today, it's a highly fragile balance. We encourage all of our listeners to dive into the Expanded Anti-Trafficking Act and the Simulated Birth Rectification Act for themselves. Explore the material, weigh the scales, and decide where you believe the line between criminal deception and necessary compassion to truly be drawn.